Greetings to all Catholics. This is Sergio Becerra II, and welcome to my channel. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe for future updates. So today we're going to be covering some history of the Catholic Church. So I'm going to be reading from this book that I have right here, The Popes, Every Question Answered, from St. Peter to Pope Francis, the fascinating biographies of all 266 popes. The author of the book is Rupert Matthews. So I'm going to be reading from this whole book here, covering every Roman pontiff that have served in the Catholic Church, from St. Peter to Francis. Okay. So let's get in, shall we? Just going right through. Okay, here we go. Here we are. Chapter 1. The Late Roman Empire, 1st to 4th centuries. The very earliest popes were leaders of the small Christian community in pagan Rome. The nature and form of the office they held is under, but by the year 300, the Bishop of Rome had emerged as a powerful spiritual force within Christianity and the Roman Empire. What had begun as a religion of foreigners, the impoverished, and slaves that met with mistrust and, at times, terrible persecution, had become the mainstream faith of Rome. Wealth and lands flowed into the hands of the church, so the Bishop of Rome took on the roles of caring for the poor, building churches, and managing finances. But just as the papacy was finding its feet, disaster struck with the fall of Rome. So this is just the introduction to chapter 1, this small paragraph right here. So now we're going to start off with the very first Pope of Rome, and that would be the Apostle of Jesus Christ, St. Peter himself. St. Peter, the first Pope, from 33 AD to 64 AD. St. Peter was both a personal disciple of Jesus Christ and the first person to organize a community of Christians in Rome, together with the unique mission entrusted to him by Jesus. These facts mean that Peter is today recognized as having been the first pope. This was not always the case. The early Christians in Rome reserved the title of pope for Peter's successors. Okay, here we go. That first paragraph was just a small introduction into Peter's life. So here we go. So we already know. I think a lot of us already know about Saint Peter, but this is going to be a big um, chapter to go through. Peter was born as Simon in Bethsaida on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, together with his brother Andrew. He became a fisherman and moved to Capernaum and moved to Capernaum, where he married a local girl. Peter spent some time with John the Baptist, but when Jesus began his ministry, he became one of the very first disciples to give up his home to follow Christ. From the start, Peter was recognized as a leader among the disciples and seems to have been present with Jesus at every important event in his life. Peter was there to hear most of Jesus' sermons and parables and witnessed the raising of Jairus' daughter, the Transfiguration, the Last Supper, and the agony in the garden. So right here we hear a little bit about Peter's life leading up to him following Jesus as a disciple, being with him the entire time, as it says here, from his sermons, his parables, all, to his transfiguration, the Last Supper, and the agony in the garden. But let's remember, Peter denied Jesus 3 times, not long after he was arrested before being crucified. And of course, we already know that one of the 12 disciples, that would be Judas Iscariot, that would betray him. But Peter was the one that denied him. And yet, the Bible does prove of the existence of the papacy in Matthew chapter 16, 18 through 19, where it says, "Thou art Peter, and among this and on and among this rock I will build my church, that he will and that I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven, and the gates of hell will not prevail." The New Testament does show proof of the papacy's existence. So not only was Jesus the founder of Christianity, but also the founder of the Catholic Church, even though the word Catholic was not used until many years later, but the New Testament does prove of the papacy's existence. And of course, Peter is mentioned a lot. And then, of course, one thing about Peter is that 2 of Peter's successors as popes are even mentioned in the Bible. I forget which Gospels, but they're mentioned in there. Pope Saint Linus, that would be Peter's second in command after Peter's crucifixion, and then of course you've got Pope Saint Clement I, or as he was known during his time, Saint Clement of Rome. But Clement I would be the 4th Pope of Rome after Peter and Linus. But we're gonna cover some of Peter's other successors after his time in future videos. Leader of the disciples. The particular favor with which Jesus viewed Peter is illustrated several times in the New Testament. When Jesus asked the disciples who they thought he was, it was Peter who stated that they took him to be the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus then told Peter that he was blessed because of his insight and gave him the name or title of Cephas, the Aramaic word for rock. This name was later rendered into Greek as Peter, the name by which the fisherman born as Simon is today best known. Of crucial importance to the papacy, Jesus then went on to tell the disciples that upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Jesus continued speaking directly to Peter. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. So, as I just mentioned right now, the Bible does prove of the papacy's existence being started by Christ himself by giving Peter the keys to the kingdom of heaven, making him the first pope. I forget which gospel, I think it was John, but I forget which chapter and verses, but it would be after Jesus' resurrection that Peter will be fully be confirmed as pope. He is made pope by Jesus before his death, but then fully confirmed after his resurrection, because Jesus tells Peter, lead and govern my sheep and flock. So Peter is in charge of leading Christ's flock and his followers and his teachings to follow him into a new religion in which there will be peace and salvation those who believe in him. These passages found in the Gospel of Matthew are taken to mean that Jesus entrusted the care of his followers to St. Peter, a duty that Peter then passed on to his successors. It was largely on this basis that later popes established their claim to supremacy over other bishops. Exactly what Jesus intended in this incident has been disputed, particularly by Protestant theologians, but there can be no doubt at all that he intended Peter to have a special role of some kind. Throughout the Gospels, Peter comes across as being generous and warm hearted, but somewhat hot-tempered. This latter trait was shown most clearly when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus had gone to the garden to pray, taking with him 3 disciples, of which Peter was one. Just as Jesus finished praying, another disciple, Judas, arrived at the head of a group of men, some of whom were armed. Judas kissed Jesus, a pre-arranged signal to the servants of the high priest who Judas had brought with him. Those men surged forward to seize Jesus, and Peter leaped to his defense. In the struggle that ensued, Peter cut off the ear of Malchus, the high priest's servant. So once Judas gave the signal by kissing Jesus on the cheek and Jesus being arrested, that's when Peter pulls out his own sword, cutting off the ear of the servant of the high priest Caiaphas, in which Jesus goes up to that servant and heals his ear. That night, Jesus was put on trial. As Christ predicted, Peter was asked 3 times if he was a follower of Jesus. And each time Peter denied that this was the case, Peter was no doubt justifiably frightened of being arrested himself or of being set upon by a mob. Peter is absent from the crucifixion, but only Christ's mother, Mary Magdalene, and St. John seem to have been present. But he appears as a witness to the resurrection. So Peter, as I've mentioned, after denying Christ 3 times because he was frightened that he would be arrested or be beaten by a mob, he disappears out of sight for a while. He's not there present at the crucifixion. So as what I'm reading here, even also in the Gospels, that both his mother, the Virgin Mary, Mary Magdalene, and St. John are there present. But Peter is witness to his resurrection. John was so far, as I see, the only disciple that stood with Christ to the very end when he suffered on the cross. Peter, as the first pope, was just too scared what he had done by denying him and not being there with him. Feared that he would be arrested. Now, and so here's the thing, and there's gonna be some popes that I'm gonna get to in later videos, because there are some that are known to be bad, really bad and corrupt. Peter, on the other hand, he's like a combination of good and bad. He does good throughout his entire life by preaching the gospel, but at the same time, he's also bad because, well, not really bad, but a little bad because he denies Christ 3 times, and he's not there present with him I mean, there's a lot that the New Testament talks about, such as when Jesus is seen walking on water. And at one point, the gospel talks about Peter also walking on water, but then he falls, in which Jesus says, why did you not believe me?" So Peter is somewhat of a combination of good and bad, as being the first pope, including being a disciple. Okay. He was the first of the disciples to see the risen Christ and remained a key player during the 40 days that Christ stayed on earth. Thereafter, the sources of Peter's later life became less extensive. The Acts of the Apostles shows that Peter played a very important leadership role in the early Christian community in Jerusalem. He preached a major sermon on Pentecost and insisted on a new disciple being selected as a replacement for Judas. Peter is recorded as having been arrested and put on trial in front of the Sanhedrin, where, although he openly defied the judges, he was set free. He was later imprisoned by King Herod, but escaped. Set free by an angel, Peter then traveled to Lydda, Joppa, and Caesarea to speak to followers of Jesus and keep their faith alive. It was about this time that Peter began preaching the message of Christ to non-Jews, and it seems to have been Peter who first set out rules for allowing Gentiles to enter the Christian community. So after Jesus' resurrection and later in Peter's life, we see him going around to non-Christian countries to spread the word of Christ and the Gospels until he makes his way to Rome. That's in which which I will mention right now. Things will start to get more serious. Okay, sorry, I need a little drink here. Letters of Saint Peter. Two letters. Letters of Saint Peter. Two letters thought to have been written by Peter are included in the New Testament. The first epistle of St. Peter is addressed to people living in Roman provinces in Asia Minor. It speaks of Jesus and urges the recipients to be steadfast in their faith during apparently difficult times. The second epistle is addressed to churches generally and has a less specific message than the first. In this letter, Peter urges his leaders to lead lives of good Christian virtue. He then condemns false teachers who were already twisting the true Christian message for their own purposes. The letter then explains why Christ had not returned in the second coming as soon as many had expected. There has been considerable debate as to whether the two letters were in fact written by Peter. They were originally written in Greek, and both contain fine rhetorical flourishes. Peter, however, was an illiterate fisherman whose first language was Aramaic. It is therefore unlikely that he could have written these letters with his own hand. However, Peter is known to have had a secretary called Silvanus, who may well have helped with the composition of the letters. Where Peter was when he wrote the epistles is likewise much debated. The first epistle states that the writer was in Babylon. This cannot have been literally true, and is likely a coded reference to the fact that he was living in the capital of a great empire, i.e., Rome. So there are letters, which we all know, the epistles written by Peter himself. And it is true that Peter could not read. So it's likely that someone had to have written these letters for him in order to spread the word around. Now I'm going to read this highlighted paragraph right here, the Basilica. So this is in regards to the first St. Peter's Basilica that was erected in Rome by the Roman Emperor Constantine. The Basilica. In 318, Emperor Constantine ordered that a vast basilica should be built over the tomb of St. Peter. This was demolished in the early 16th century, and a new basilica was completed on the site by 1626, with the old altar remaining in place. In the 1950s, an excavation under the altar found an ancient tomb containing the bones of a man aged in his 60s that dated back to the mid-1st century. These were declared to be the remains of St. Peter. So, yes, the first St. Peter's Basilica was built in the early 4th century AD by the Emperor Constantine. Right above the right above the right above the remains where St. Peter is said to be buried. So when the new basilica was being built in the 16th century by Pope Julius II, the old altar still remained in place while the new basilica was being built. It wouldn't be till later on in the mid 20th 20th century, in the 1950s. Well, Pope Pius XII was still Pope throughout most of the 1950s. Pius XII died in 1958. Now, it is said that around that time that bones were found dating back to ancient times, around the time of Jesus, about a man that had died in the 60s, and Peter did die in the 60s at the time of his crucifixion. So I do believe in all my heart and through a lot of us Catholics that those are the remains and bones of St. Peter himself. Okay, so we're almost done here. I'm gonna read these two long paragraphs. Sorry, let me just adjust myself here. Bishop of Rome. As an apostle with a direct personal link to Christ, Peter would have enjoyed enormous respect among the Christian community in Rome. He would also have been in a position to lay down the law and rebuke those who broke the teachings of Christ. He may have been referred to as the presbyter or episcopate of the community. The two words seem to have been used interchangeably in early Christian times and mean overseer or organizer. Our modern word bishop is derived from episcopoi. episcopoi. So it is likely that during his lifetime, Peter was regarded as Bishop of Rome. Given the small number of Christians living in Rome and the very different conditions of the time, however, a bishop at this date would have been a very different type of official to modern bishops. A few years after Peter arrived in Rome, there was a devastating fire. Many people suspected that the fire had been caused by arson, and Emperor Nero quickly blamed the Christians, ordering that they should be executed in degrading ways. Some were thrown to wild dogs, some were burned, and still more were crucified. It would seem that most of the Christians executed were killed during festivals marking the 10th anniversary of Nero assuming power. October 13th, 64 AD, which is recognized as the date of Peter's martyrdom. Condemned to crucifixion as Peter was being led to the cross, he declared that he was unfit to die in the same manner as Jesus, and so asked the soldiers to nail him upside down. His body was later taken down and carried over the river to the Vatican Hill for burial. At the time, this was open country and a suitable place for the burial of a criminal. The surviving Christians marked the spot with a large red stone, symbolizing the rock of Peter's name. A few decades later, the rock was replaced by a proper shrine and, later still, the basilica. So, Peter is crucified under the orders of the Emperor Nero, in which he is later buried at a site called Vatican Hill, which the Vatican itself, St. Peter's Basilica, would later be built during Constantine's time, once Christianity became legalized and the dominant religion within the Roman Empire. So this right here covers the history of the first Pope of Rome, St. Peter, disciple of Christ. So tell me what you think of this video. Comment below, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell for future updates. So I'm going to be covering more of some of Peter's later successors in later videos, and I hope you stay tuned for more. So hope to see you soon. So have a blessed day to all of you. Take care and goodbye.